There are decisions that appear to be free, and yet are born from an ancient whisper that is not heard but is obeyed. That whisper is a silent wound. It shows no bandages or blood. It asks for no permission. It makes no announcement. Yet it tilts your balance in favor of what keeps you safe, not of what makes you grow. Every time you say yes while wanting to say no, every time you accept less to avoid feeling the sting of rejection, every time you withdraw before the first step out of fear of failure, that wound operates. It doesn't show up in photographs or appear in diagnoses, yet it writes in your schedule, sits at your table, and accompanies you to bed. When you open your eyes, it has already spoken for you. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that the happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts, and that phrase, repeated so many times, only awakens when you admit that your thoughts are not free if they are held hostage by fear. Fear dresses itself as prudence, disguises itself as modesty, adorns itself as realism, but in truth, it is the continuation of the pain you hid. Denying what hurt does not erase its effect. It makes it more efficient and more silent. That is why this journey will not ask you to run away from what hurts, but to approach it with the light on. Because what you do not face governs you. What you face little by little obeys you. Seneca wrote that no wind is favorable to the one who does not know where they are going. Many times you have sailed without direction, believing that the lack of destination was simply flexibility, when deep down it was the habit of not choosing for yourself. The wound avoids direction because direction demands responsibility. If you decide with clarity, you can no longer blame chance or others. You will see yourself. That vision is uncomfortable, but it is also the door to freedom. If the past was a dark room, today we light a lamp. And if a part of you fears discovering cobwebs, remember that cleaning begins by seeing the dust. Epictetus insisted that there are things that depend on you and things that do not, and serenity is born from distinguishing them. The wound, however, blurs that boundary. It convinces you that you can prevent every blow by controlling everything, or that you can do nothing, and therefore it is better not to try. In both extremes, freedom is lost. When you believe everything depends on you, you consume yourself with perfectionism and guilt. When you believe nothing depends on you, you hand your life over to fate. The Stoic path is another, to choose your response well to what is inevitable and to practice it until it becomes character. Perhaps you wonder why go back to what hurts if what you long for is to stop suffering. Because what is not processed repeats itself, and it repeats itself disguised as opportunity. You seek a partner who promises care, and you find the same pattern that validates your insecurity. You accept a job that seems like a promotion and discover the same old resignation. You call silence prudence, endurance maturity, and the surrender of your dignity realism. Secretly, you hope the script will change without changing the lead actor, but the script changes when the protagonist stops obeying the voice that limits him. This episode is a pact of honesty. It is not a trick to deactivate emotions, nor a catalogue of motivational phrases. It is an intimate space where we train the gaze, refine the pause, and return reason to its place as guide. Reason is not coldness, it is warmth well directed. It is the discipline of thinking without insulting yourself, the practice of listening to your judgments and submitting them to the test of facts. When reason holds the hand of the heart, the wound loses its authority. If you have come this far, something inside you longs to stop repeating. You do not need to forget what happened to live with dignity. You need to understand it and choose from that understanding. Understanding does not mean justifying the unjust or denying the offense. It means taking back the helm. Today, we will be accompanied by ancient voices still alive. Marcus Aurelius, to remind you that everything happens in your mind before it happens in the world. Seneca, to teach you to distinguish noise from the real. And Epictetus, to bring you back to the territory of your control. These voices will not save you from life, but they will prepare you to live it without betraying yourself. I propose an experience. Breathe as if this minute were the first in a long time. Feel the weight of your body. Slowly name the emotion that predominates. Describe the scene with precision. What are you avoiding? What are you exaggerating? What are you holding on to so as not to feel the discomfort of choosing differently? Exposing yourself to these questions is an act of self-love. Whoever loves themselves tells themselves the truth. Whoever respects themselves acts in coherence with that truth. Imagine that from now on, every rushed reaction becomes a pause, every automatic judgment a question, every fear a rehearsal of courage. It is not about turning yourself into a statue or conquering an inhuman calm. It is about learning to be with yourself without violence. It is about rehearsing a life where the past advises but does not decide, where dignity is not negotiated even when loneliness presses, where the present ceases to be a waiting corridor and becomes home. This is the threshold. In crossing it, I do not promise an absence of storms. I promise a compass. I promise a frank conversation with yourself, a journey through the rooms you prefer to keep closed, a method that is soft and firm at once. First, we will look at the wound, then we will practice the distinction between what depends on you and what does not, and then I will invite you to act without asking fear for permission. At the end of this journey, the wound will still exist, but its throne will be empty. You will occupy that place with the serenity of one who remembers themselves capable. Breathe once more. You are here, you are on time. And although it may not seem so, today can begin a different story if you choose to inhabit it with lucidity, with temperance, and with courage. Let us begin. Before moving forward, let me tell you something with the voice of someone who has stumbled and stood up many times. Clarity does not arrive like a lightning bolt splitting you in two. It arrives like a morning that slowly brightens, and that slowness is wise. Seneca would call it exercise, Marcus Aurelius, daily practice. You can call it a worthy habit. Each day will bring you small, almost invisible minutes in which you will choose again. When you are asked to return to a role that no longer fits you, remember that your worth does not depend on anyone's acceptance. When fear proposes retreat, offer instead a brief gesture of courage, a clear word, a respectful boundary, an action coherent with your principles. When guilt digs its claws in for having changed, remind it that growth is not betrayal of anyone. It is honoring the life you were given. Epictetus would say that what is decisive is not what happens, but what you do with what happens. Today, here, you choose to take responsibility. If you doubt, breathe again. If you hurt, place your hand on your chest and remain. If you get lost, reread these lines until the muscle of presence warms. In this company we form, you do not need dazzling heroics. You need constancy, and constancy, like a river, carves the stone that once seemed unmovable. In this way, without fanfare, your story will begin to move. Continue breathing and return to yourself with patience. Before we begin, declare your commitment in the comments. From today on, my wound does not decide for me. That phrase will be a reminder that you are here to face what conditions you, to set boundaries, and to not allow an old pain to choose for you. This is the moment to honor your dignity, recover your center, and decide with reason, not with fear. Without further preamble, let us begin. First Stoic lesson, face your wound. What you deny sits at your table and eats first. For years you learned to run faster than your own pain, to change the subject when the conversation brushed against memory, to laugh a little louder so as not to hear the crack in your voice. You believed that escape was strength and that forgetting was wisdom. But a wound ignored does not die. It only learns to speak the language of your decisions. When you choose from avoidance, your compass aligns with fear. Marcus Aurelius invited us to look at things as they are, without adornment. and in that nakedness appears the possibility of choosing differently. Facing the wound is not reopening it. It is recognizing its existence so you no longer obey it blindly. Begin with a simple gesture. Name it. Speak softly what hurt you and what is hard to pronounce. It is not about dramatizing or finding culprits. It is about recovering your voice in the story of your life. Seneca advised examining each day as if it were your last, reviewing actions and motives, not with cruelty, but with clarity. If each night you ask yourself what moved you to act, little by little you will see the thread. Perhaps that thread is the fear of being abandoned, the shame of feeling lesser, the anger that clenches fists when you believe no one sees you. Without that map, your steps repeat the same route. Epictetus insisted that facts are neutral and that what wounds us is the judgment we place on them. The wound, being old, manufactures instant judgments. At another's delay, you conclude they are scorning you. At a disagreement, you decide you are rejected. At silence, you sign the sentence of abandonment. The training consists in delaying judgment. Before proclaiming a truth, ask what data support it. Look for evidence. Do you hear your wound dictating the verdict, or are you looking at the world as it is? That investigative pause is already a form of freedom. Facing your wound also means no longer negotiating with your dignity. How many times did you offer endless explanations to be accepted? How many times did you give up boundaries to keep a place? How many times did you laugh at what hurt you to belong? Each concession was a silent payment for false security. Today it is time to balance the account. Marcus Aurelius suggested returning to the body and the breath when the mind flares. The body does not lie. If before a request you feel your chest shrink, listen. If your back tightens, listen. The body gives you signals that your mind tries to silence with arguments. A brave gaze is not a cruel one. You do not need to humiliate yourself to recognize mistakes. Repentance, rightly understood, is the decision to act differently from now on. Seneca said that time is the most precious good because it is the only one that does not return. Let your repentance not be theater with blows to the chest, but an economy of new actions. Speak where once you were silent, step back where once you insisted, rest where once you exploited yourself, learn where you pretended you already knew. Each gesture is a stitch that closes without erasing the story. Accepting that you were hurt does not make you weak, it makes you true. Weakness feeds on pious lies that in the end become prisons. The truth may hurt, but it leaves you standing. Epictetus reminds us that no one can harm you without your consent, and the most subtle consent is the one you give when you prefer self-deception. Today, choose agreement with what is real. If you cry, cry without shame. If your voice trembles, let it tremble. Emotion does not cancel your strength, it matures it. Facing the wound requires method. You can write down what happened, detailing what you saw, what you thought, what you felt, and what you did. Then separate the facts from interpretations and look for alternatives. Ask yourself what your most dignified version would do in a similar scene. Imagine responses you had not rehearsed. Repeat them calmly in your mind, like someone practicing a movement. When the real situation appears, your muscle will be ready. Stoicism is training. What you repeat in calm, you sustain in the storm. Forgiveness is also needed, not as a light absolution of the unforgivable, but as an act of personal liberation. To forgive is to renounce the fantasy of a different past in order to choose a better present. Seneca warned that anger feeds on expectations, and serenity is born from adjusting those expectations to what is possible. You cannot change what has already been, but you can refuse to repeat it in the same way within you. Forgiveness, understood like this, is not amnesia. It is the decision not to use your wound as a weapon against yourself. Perhaps you will discover that, in facing it, an unexpected tenderness appears toward that part of you that survived as it could. That tenderness does not soften you excessively. It humanizes you. Marcus Aurelius invited us to treat ourselves as a friend who needs encouragement, not as an enemy who deserves punishment. With that inner voice, you can sustain the process without turning it into a tribunal. When the gaze is compassionate and firm, fear loses excuses. From now on, each time the old reaction invites you to obey, do something different, even if small. Take a step of honesty where before you covered up, a step of boundary where before you yielded, a step of silence where before you over-explained. These steps, added up, will return to you the authority that the wound usurped. And if you ever step back, do not abandon yourself. Look again, name again, begin again. That beginning is your victory. Before closing this first practice, engrave yourself a humble and powerful motto. To see is to begin to heal. Do not demand immediate results or perfect purity. Demand continuity. Continuity, more than enthusiasm, builds character. If today you face and tomorrow you face again, if today you name and tomorrow you name again, your mind will learn not to flee. Epictetus would say that repeated exercise turns possibility into habit, and habit into second nature. Thus, what now seems a heroic effort will soon be a simple way of living. And when someone asks you what changed, perhaps you will not have a loud anecdote to tell, but you will notice that you no longer choose as before. You no longer fit yourself into the small place they offered you. You no longer beg for approval. You no longer postpone what matters. You have faced, and therefore you have regained the right to decide calmly. So let this be your closing image. You sit before your own story as someone opens a window in a darkened room. Air enters, light enters, shapes become clear. There are no accused or executioners in that scene. There is responsibility and there is choice. You thank the wound for the signal that brought you here. You take away its scepter and invite it to occupy its proper place, that of teacher, not of queen. Seneca, if he saw you, would smile slowly. You have understood that freedom is the work of a craftsman. Marcus Aurelius, if he were with you, would remind you that what opposes the nature of the good cannot prevail if your mind remains upright. And you, as you rise, will know that this uprightness is not harshness, but alignment with your values. You will walk without disguise. You will breathe without debt. And each dawn will find you a little more true than the day before. Move forward without haste. Second Stoic lesson: distinguish what depends on you. When the wound leads, the boundary between the possible and the impossible becomes a swamp. You try to control everything, and when you fail, you confirm your own prophecy. You're useless, you can't, you're worthless. Epictetus lit the way out with a simple and exact phrase: of things, some depend on us and others do not. If you make this distinction a practice, your mind regains air. If you forget it, you drown in unmet expectations and in guilt that isn't yours to bear. What depends on you is your judgment, your intention, your effort, your choice in the present. What does not depend on you is the recognition of others, the memory of the past, the whims of fortune, the interpretation of others. This line, at first abstract, becomes concrete in daily decisions. When someone is late, you can choose to ask with respect instead of condemning in silence. When an opportunity is delayed, you can keep preparing instead of declaring disaster. When criticism comes, you can distinguish what is useful from what only seeks to wound you. That is power. Marcus Aurelius repeated that obstacles become material for virtue when assumed with integrity. If the weather doesn't fit your plan, virtue is adaptability. If someone doesn't understand your boundary, virtue is firmness. If the project fails, virtue is applied learning. The wound, on the other hand, prefers the theater of impotence. It complains, dramatizes, demands impossible guarantees, and then calls itself realistic. Stoicism dismantles that play with serenity. It doesn't deny the pain of loss, but prevents that pain from dictating the rest of your life. Seneca warned that he who fears before the time suffers more than necessary. Fear projects scenes ahead of time and makes you live in worlds that exist only in your head. To interrupt that projection, practice a brief ritual. Describe precisely what is happening right now. What facts are in front of me? What can I do with them today? What is impossible, no matter how much I insist? Reducing the horizon to what is actionable is not renouncing the dream, it is preparing it. Each measurable day of action brings you closer than 1,000 days of fantasy. The distinction between what depends on you and what doesn't also organizes relationships. You cannot force anyone to understand you, love you, or change. You can, however, communicate clearly, choose boundaries, withdraw if dignity is compromised. When you forget this law, you become a manager of other people's emotions and neglect your own. The wound, cunning, makes you confuse sacrifice with love and control with care. Sometimes it tells you that if you do a little more, you'll finally be seen. Sometimes it convinces you that if you do a little less, you'll avoid rejection. Both traps take you away from yourself. Epictetus proposed a constant examination of impressions. Every thought that arrives deserves to be questioned. Does what I fear depend on me? Does what I pursue with anxiety depend on me? Does it depend on me that this person values me in a certain way? If the answer is no, let it go. Letting go not as a gesture of indifference, but as an act of respect for your limited energy. If the answer is yes, act without delay, even if the result takes time. Correct action, sustained over time, is the architecture of your freedom. The body again becomes teacher in this lesson. When you try to control the uncontrollable, your breathing quickens, your neck tightens, your jaw locks. When you accept the inevitable and choose your gesture, the air returns, shoulders lower, your gaze softens. It is not magic, it is coherence. Your entire system recognizes the truth and organizes itself around it. Practice feeling that change. It is a physiological compass that does not lie. Marcus Aurelius spoke of focusing the mind on the present as if the rest of time no longer existed. This concentration is not selfishness or forgetfulness, it is focus. When you place your attention on what you can do today, without giving it away to conjectures you cannot control, life acquires a manageable rhythm. Steps become short but consistent, and consistency is what builds the work. He who waits for perfect conditions waits forever. He who works with what he has creates what he needs. Here too appears the notion of loss. Accepting what you cannot control is grieving what wasn't and bidding farewell to the illusion of omnipotence. It hurts, yes, because a part of you loved the fiction that, if you tried hard enough, nothing bad would happen again. But that farewell opens a new space, one of responsibility without tyranny, one of freedom without caprice. In that space you can live without dragging invisible chains or distributing blame like coins. For training, choose a concrete area of your life and make an honest inventory. Separate in 2 mental columns what depends on you and what does not. Act rigorously on the first. Improve your habits, learn what you lack, communicate clearly, set boundaries, ask for help if you need it, and let go with elegance of the second, others' responses, the weather, the past, fortune. Seneca will accompany you in that exercise with his sobriety. He will call virtue moderation, freedom the renunciation of the futile, greatness consistency. Epictetus will agree, because you will see that the more you choose well, the less chance dominates you. And when fatigue visits you, remember that distinguishing is not a one-time act, it is a discipline. There will be days when you insist where there is no door, and nights when you want to control even another's breathing. Forgive yourself quickly and correct soon. Forgiveness without correction is indulgence. Correction without forgiveness is sterile harshness. The virtuous path is held with both hands. Imagine you hold 2 bowls. In one you place what you can do today, write that honest message, complete that step of the project, organize your finances, train your body, study an hour. In the other bowl you rest what you cannot force, the immediate response, the perfect result, universal understanding, the approval that sometimes never comes. Your task is to fill each day the first bowl with concrete actions, and each night return the second to the shelf. This symbolic gesture calms your anxiety. Marcus Aurelius in his journal reminded himself not to waste what remained of his life in useless discussions or chasing ghosts. Today, perhaps that advice means turning off the noise of opinions for a while, accepting that not everyone will see what you see, that not everyone will believe in your process, and that this is fine. If your mind remains upright, the world may tilt without knocking you down. I would like you to take 3 questions for daily practice, not as magic formulas, but as keys of return. What depends on me in this situation? What does not depend on me, no matter how much I wish it? What is the most dignified gesture I can make right now with what does depend on me? When you answer them, act. Sober action defeats rumination. Clarity was born of distinguishing. Freedom will be born of deciding. And if fear insists that without absolute control you will be lost, answer with a phrase from Epictetus that deserves to be an anchor. No one is free who is not master of himself. That is the promise of this lesson. To be master of yourself is not to dominate everything. It is to govern your judgment, your word, and your hands. The rest, let go as the leaf falls when autumn arrives. You will see that, in letting go, you are not left empty. You are left available for what truly belongs to you. Act now. Third, Stoic lesson. Do not decide from fear. Fear is a brilliant advisor for survival and a terrible counselor for living. It keeps you safe from fires, but it also locks you in rooms without windows. When the wound feeds it, fear multiplies phantoms. It whispers that you are not enough, that you will be abandoned, that if you speak the truth, you will be left alone, that if you try and fail, you will never rise again. Seneca warned that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and that disproportion is the mark of fear-driven decisions. Fear is not eradicated, it is relocated. You give it a seat, but not the steering wheel. To achieve this, you need practice. First, recognize its signals: quickened pulse, short breath, tense shoulders, thoughts spinning endlessly. Second, practice the pause. Count 3 full breaths before responding to anything that matters. Within that pause lies the world, your reason, your values, your memory of other times when you endured. Third, ask a decisive question. What would I choose now if I were not afraid? Answer softly. There lies your direction. Epictetus encouraged rehearsing in the imagination what we fear, so that when it arrives, it does not find us untrained. If you fear saying no, imagine the scene. Repeat your words with firmness and respect. Feel your body sustaining you. If you fear taking an opportunity because of failure, visualize the error and your calm response. Visualize the learning and your continuity. This rehearsal is not superstition. It is mental preparation. What the soul rehearses, the body later recognizes. Marcus Aurelius wrote that if something depends on you, act. If not, accept it. Fear confuses both shores and delays your movement with noble excuses. It tells you to wait for the perfect sign, unanimous approval, total security. But life only offers sufficient signs, partial approvals, and inevitable risks. The brave step is taken on that uncertain ground. Do not seek to abolish the tremor. Learn to walk while trembling. Do not decide from fear when you love. Fear proposes minimization pacts. Love little to suffer little. Remain silent to avoid conflict. Always yield to preserve. But chronic renunciation of your truth deteriorates the bond and deteriorates you. To hold your word with calm, to set limits with respect, to withdraw if dignity requires. These are expressions of self-love that nourish the possibility of real love. If someone only wants you diminished, they want you little. Do not decide from fear when you work. Fear makes you accept less than what is fair, disguise your talent, hide your opinion to keep a seat. Sometimes it appears as prudence, sometimes as strategy. Ask, What part of me is protecting itself, and from what? If the price of staying is your self-respect, you are already paying too much. Fear also sabotages your personal growth with a pious mask, perfectionism. Because you cannot do it perfectly, you decide not to do it. Because you don't know everything, you decide not to begin. Seneca would say that delay is the greatest thief of life. Start with what you have, here, now. Improve along the way. Your value does not come from immediate success, but from the coherence of your attempt. To weaken fear, practice 2 anchors. The first is physical. Drop your shoulders, loosen your jaw, exhale longer than you inhale. The system learns there is no danger. The second is verbal. Express in a brief phrase the action you will take. You will say it as an intimate vow. Today I send that message. Today I correct that boundary. Today I present that idea. Repeat it. Fulfill it. Credibility with yourself is the strongest antidote against the tyranny of fear. Perhaps fear tells you that if you act bravely, you will lose valuable things. You may lose some, but what you keep will be true. What holds only while you shrink is not gain. It is debt. And existential debts charge exorbitant interest, resentment, anxiety, insomnia, emptiness. Free yourself from that bitter credit. Prefer the clean balance of inner peace. Remember that Stoic courage is not recklessness. It is not about leaping without seeing, but about seeing with precision and, having seen reality, acting without yielding to the voice that reduces you. Serene courage measures risk, prepares what it can, accepts what it cannot control, and still moves. That movement, however small, changes the direction of history. When in doubt, pay attention to a phrase that serves as a beacon. Do what you must, with what you have, where you are. It is not from Marcus, nor Seneca, nor Epictetus, but it condenses their spirit. For their ethics do not demand theatrical greatness, they demand persistent honesty. One correct step, repeated, builds a life. Perhaps you remember times when fear saved you, and it is fair to acknowledge it. It pulled you aside in time, made you say no to a dubious invitation, forced you to check a contract more carefully. Thank that function, and at the same time, define its limits. Fear is a doorkeeper, not an architect. It can guard, but it cannot design the house. If you ask it for plans, it will draw them with bars. Your reason, lit by your values, decides where to place the windows. In practice, commit to brief experiments in courage. If you usually remain silent, prepare a short and respectful phrase to state your point. If you usually procrastinate, choose a ridiculously small block of time and begin, even if it is not ideal. If you usually flee, decide to stay 5 minutes longer in the discomfort and observe what happens. Small experiments, big turns. Fear diminishes when you verify through experience that you could withstand what you thought you couldn't. Marcus Aurelius repeated to himself that he should be like the rock against which the waves break, not the wave that breaks against every rock. That rock is not blind rigidity, it is living stability, a rock that thinks, feels, and chooses. When you recall that image, you are not ordering yourself to be insensitive, you are ordering yourself not to abandon your center. And keeping the center does not mean defeating the other, it means not surrendering to your smallest version. Seneca wrote that most anxiety comes from waiting for what is to come. To deprive that machine of fuel, return your attention to the only operational place, the present. Put into action a concrete gesture, however small, that contradicts fear's command. If it tells you to hide, show up. If it tells you to apologize for existing, give thanks and take your place. If it tells you to wait forever, act in 10 minutes. That loving contradiction re-educates your system. And when you fail, because you will fail, do not allow fear to turn the episode into identity. You have made a mistake. You have not become it. Epictetus would ask you to treat yourself like a serious learner. Correct, learn, do again. Fear will want to write the story of failure in capital letters. You write it in lowercase and at the end of the paragraph. Then open another paragraph with the word continuity. For many, the idea of courage evokes great gestures. For you, from today, it may mean the consistency of not betraying yourself in the small things. Turning off the screen on time, getting up when you said you would, choosing the food that nourishes you, saying no when you want to say no, saying yes when you want to say yes. These tiny acts wear down the bars of fear until the door opens on its own. I want to leave you with one last image. You walk across a narrow bridge, on both sides turbulent water, but the bridge is firm. Fear shouts at you to look at the water. Reason invites you to look at your steps. Choose the steps, one and another and another. When you reach the other side, you will not feel you defeated a monster. You will feel you recovered something that was yours, the ability to decide without surrendering. There begins a new life. And remember, courage grows when you honor it daily. Advance. Fourth Stoic lesson, the pause reveals clarity. The wound is in a hurry because it lives on shortcuts, on immediate conclusions, and on old narratives it does not want you to revisit. When something hurts you, the mind rushes to fill gaps, to populate silences with suspicions, to interpret gestures as judgments and delays as contempt. In that race, you choose without seeing yourself and react without asking from where you are reacting. The pause is a simple art and, at the same time, a demanding discipline to stop before responding, to breathe with deliberate slowness, to ask yourself which part of you wants to speak first, and to choose that it be your reason, not your fear. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself every morning that his task was to act in accordance with the rational and social nature that dwelled within him. Haste diverted him, pause brought him back. It is not about slowness for its own sake, but about an interval that turns impulse into a human act. Epictetus called for examining the impressions that arrive in the mind. Before assenting, interrogate them. Before obeying, put them to the test. Without this practice, another's glance becomes a sentence. With it, a glance is just one piece of data among others. Stopping for 3 full breaths is already a bridge between the past that controlled you and the present you choose to inhabit. Breathing in this way is not a mystical technique, it is an ethical decision. You renounce the violence of responding automatically and choose the responsibility of responding truthfully. Seneca warns us that whoever angers quickly is a slave to anyone who provokes him. The pause, then, is a concrete form of emancipation. You cease being a puppet to a gesture and become the author of your response. In practice, the pause orders dimensions you usually mix. What happened, what you assumed, what you feared, what you desired. By separating them, you deflate the inner pressure that confuses everything with everything. Ask yourself with tenderness and rigor, what was said exactly? What did I feel in the body? What old story was triggered? What choice would honor my values today? This sequence is not emotional bureaucracy. It is a way of restoring yourself to the helm. The pause returns to you the proper scale of things. A critique is not a collapse. An error is not identity. A delay is not abandonment. Another's boundary is not absolute rejection. By recovering that scale, dramatization diminishes and proportion appears. With proportion comes serenity. The pause also unmasks a common trick of the wound, confusing intensity with truth. What feels very strong seems true because of the strength with which it is felt. But intensity is not sufficient criteria. Pain can shout things that the facts disprove. That is why the pause summons reason as a diligent witness. What evidence do I have? What evidence is missing? What other interpretation is possible? What minimal action can I put today at the service of what I value? Answering these questions takes you away from the abyss of all or nothing. Stoicism celebrates measure. One correct step, repeated, takes you out of the circle of excessive reactions. Imagine a difficult conversation. Without pause, you anticipate attacks, draft defenses, pin labels. With pause, you listen precisely, rename what you hear, return only what is necessary, and set boundaries without theatrics. The result may not be perfect, but it will be dignified, and dignity is a form of peace. Marcus Aurelius wrote that few things are necessary for a happy life. One of those things is the ability to bring the mind back when it wanders. The pause is that bringing back. It does not argue with every thought. It walks them to the door and breathes. It does not deny emotion. It hosts it with respect and reminds it of visiting hours. Over time, the pause becomes your home. In it, you meet yourself, review, correct, and choose. Outside it, you are dragged by every gust. And though at first it may seem that you go more slowly than the world, you will soon discover that you go straighter than before. For haste covers many meters without advancing. Pause, in 2 steps, reaches the center. Pause is not perpetual abstention nor cowardly silence. It is calibration before acting. When you keep quiet out of fear, pause invites you to speak with clarity. When you speak out of impulse, pause suggests you keep quiet until you find the right word. That balance saves you regrets and grants you authority with your own conscience. Epictetus would say that he who masters himself is invincible. Mastering yourself begins with a second gained against urgency. Try today a routine. At the first tug of anger, still your shoulders. At the first sting of guilt, straighten your back. At the first claw of anxiety, look around and name 3 things you see. The trained body cooperates with the mind. Seneca would recommend reviewing at night the scenes of the day and distinguishing where pause was missing. Not to humiliate yourself, but to prepare for tomorrow. You will see patterns, certain people, certain fears, certain times. Those areas deserve more light and more rest. If you know yourself, you dose. And if you dose, you do not explode. Pause also protects your dignity in conflict. When you are pressured to respond now, when you are accused with stridency, when they want to drag you into their speed, remember that no one decides your rhythm without your permission. You can ask for a moment, propose to continue later, write instead of improvising, breathe before signing. That is not weakness, it is steadiness. Marcus Aurelius saw himself as a citizen of the universe, not a slave to others' passions. Pausing reconnects you with that citizenship. Finally, pause teaches you to live with what is unresolved without self-destruction. Not everything is clarified today. Not everything is defined now. Not every answer arrives on the first attempt. Accepting that truth reduces inner noise, and in that relative silence you hear the voice that matters most, yours when it is aligned with the good. Breathe, pause, choose, repeat. There lies a life. At times you may believe pausing will make you lose opportunities, but observe how many you lost by not pausing. The word sent without reflection broke a bridge you still needed. The purchase made in anxiety mortgaged your calm. The yes pronounced out of fear distanced you from yourself. You will recover more than you yield if you incorporate a brief conscious interval. Practice even in the pleasant. At a compliment, breathe and receive without devaluing or overacting. At an invitation, breathe and remember your priorities. At a doubt, breathe and consult your principles. Marcus Aurelius underlined that the soul is dyed with the color of its thoughts. Dye yours with the ink of deliberation. And when you fail, because you will fail, do not shift pause into punishment. Use it to reconcile with your humanity and correct your course with steady gentleness. Thus the wound ceases to dictate timing and instead follows the rhythm of virtue. A well-made pause does not delay life, it refines it. Grant yourself this brief gift, the second that separates impulse from choice. In that second, you fit. 5th Stoic lesson: the wound is not identity. For years you may have named yourself with words that do not belong to you. Fragile, clumsy, insufficient, always late, always on the verge of losing. Each label was born in some episode and then thrived like ivy, climbing up your decisions until it covered them. But a flower that grows on a wall is not confused with the wall. So too your pain is not your name. Epictetus was a slave, and yet never allowed that condition to define his worth. His teaching crosses centuries. What happens to you cannot steal who you are unless you hand over that power. Seneca added that a noble man is recognized in adversity because when difficulty presses him, he reveals his true fabric. Within you there is a fabric wider than any wound, a biography that does not fit into one episode, a dignity that existed before every blow. Remembering it is an act of justice toward yourself. If you assume yourself as your wound, you will live defending it or displaying it. If you recognize yourself as greater than it, you will put it to work for your good. Marcus Aurelius advised looking at things from the inside, seeing what they are made of. Look at what your identity is made of when you base it on the wound, on fear of losing, on need for approval, on suspicions that colonize even joy. Now look at what it is made of when you found it on virtue. Prudence without cowardice, firmness without hardness, self-respect without vanity. That difference, silent and concrete, alters your destiny. You are not the abandonment you lived through, nor the error you committed, nor the betrayal you suffered. You are what you choose from there. The wound can tell you about your limits, but it cannot dictate the limit of your worth. When you forget this truth, you become a collector of grievances or a devotee of victimhood, and both paths tie you to the same stake. Stoicism proposes another devotion, that of self-mastery. Even when the world is hostile, you can preserve an inner city that no one can plunder. That city is built with habits, honesty in words, order in daily life, care of the body, attention to truth, study of what edifies. The walls of that city are not rejection of the world. They are the structure that allows you to inhabit it without losing yourself. If you look at yourself only with the eyes of the wound, you will see scars as destiny. If you look at yourself with the Stoic gaze, you will see scars as a map. A map shows routes, not prisons. You can return to it, understand where it is not advisable to travel, discover shortcuts of wisdom you once ignored. This reading returns to you your margin of maneuver. To embody that you are not your wound, you need to practice new inner narratives. When you hear yourself thinking, "Everyone leaves me," remember those who stayed. When you think "I am not capable," list the times you endured the difficult. Epictetus insisted, it is not the facts that harm you, but your judgments about them. Change the judgment and the experience changes. The change is not magical, it is muscular. Like every muscle, it strengthens with repetitions. There will be relapses into old mental slogans. Do not take them as proof that you cannot. See them as signs that the previous habit was strong and requires time. Marcus Aurelius, in his diary, forgave himself with sobriety and demanded of himself with firmness. That balance will allow you to advance without lashing yourself or abandoning yourself. The wound often confuses you with two distorted mirrors. In one, you see yourself as less, humility turned into self-annihilation. In the other, you see yourself as more, a shell of pride that covers insecurity. The right mirror is reality, contemplated without embellishment and without insults. In reality, you fit with your talent and your limit, with your shadows and your desire. That portrait dignifies you. Seneca would say that to live is to practice truth, and truth here means telling yourself whole, neither a hero without cracks, nor a failure with legs. When you describe yourself whole, you choose more whole. Decisions made from an amputated identity end up amputating your life. Decisions born from a complete identity can, even in loss, leave you standing. There is a practical consequence of abandoning the altar of the wound as identity. Your relationship with the past changes. You stop using it as an alibi and start using it as a library. An alibi paralyzes you. A library teaches you. You do not go there to weep always over the same chapter. You go to study how you want to write the next ones. If others named you harshly, bathe yourself with new names that respond to your present actions. If you named yourself small, choose a worthy name and back it with conduct. Identity, for a Stoic, is not proclaimed, it is enacted. If you act with virtue, the name will find you without shouting. What does identity freed from the wound look like in daily life? It looks like saying no without guilt when something betrays your values, saying yes with joy when something expresses them, repairing without humiliating yourself when you make mistakes, asking for help without confusing it with inferiority. It looks like working well without needing approval as oxygen, resting without feeling you must justify it, loving without mortgaging your dignity to buy affection. Above all, it looks like the way you speak to yourself when no one listens. If that voice treats you with respect, the world may take time to treat you that way, but you no longer betray yourself. Epictetus emphasized that freedom begins in the inner forum. When you recognize yourself there, the outside arranges itself with time. You are not your wound, and to remember it, it is useful to ritualize it. Each dawn, pronounce a brief mantra. Today, I will act as one who knows he is valuable. Take that mantra to a gesture. Care for your body, order a corner, learn a concept, keep a promise. Gestures consolidate identity as beams consolidate a house. With the days, the old voice that told you who you were will fade, and another, more serene one, will speak with authority. Marcus Aurelius trusted that the soul strengthens when it acts in harmony with its nature. Act thus, and your true name will appear. Sometimes it will seem to you that the world insists on returning you to your old label. Do not argue with everyone, argue with your actions. Let your constancy become argument. Let your calm become response. Seneca would warn that nothing great arises suddenly, a firm identity neither. It is cultivation, and like all cultivation, it requires light, water, and care. The light is your principles, the water your habits, the care your loving vigilance. If you get distracted, return tomorrow. If a word wounds you, return to your mantra. If you doubt, remember that doubt does not redefine you, it only calls you to think. At the center of this lesson beats a silent and definitive decision. I will not treat myself as my wound treated me. I will treat myself as a good custodian treats what he protects as valuable, with respect and firmness. And when I make a mistake, I will correct it without insulting myself. That is the point where the past stops carrying your name, and your name begins to carry your destiny. Breathe and accept your true stature. You are less than no one. You are more than no one. You are exactly someone capable of choosing. That capacity put into action each day makes your identity cease to be a story of damage and become a work of good. When the wound is silent, it seems that you choose, but you do not choose, you repeat. That is to say, an old voice signs your decisions while you put on the face. And if you do nothing, that pattern ends up dictating your work, your bonds, and your future. That is why subscribing is not just another click, it is a clean break with inertia. Here you will receive each week practical Stoic tools to detect when your wound is deciding, to train the pause, to distinguish what depends on you, to sustain limits without guilt, and to recover the clarity that returns the helm to you. No empty promises, method, discipline, and applicable serenity. Not subscribing means continuing to negotiate with what wounds you in silence. Subscribing means having at hand a constant compass that reminds you that you can decide from dignity and not from fear. If you recognize the sign, do not ignore it. Automatic mode does not break with wishes, it breaks with decisions. Do it now. Subscribe. Each episode can give you the word, the strategy, or the practice that prevents your wound from deciding for you again. Your life is not made to react always the same way. It is made to choose with clarity and virtue. 6. Stoic lesson. Use reason as a shield. The voices that arise from the wound are insistent and convincing. You can't, you're worthless, they'll leave you, you'll fail, better not even try. They speak in a tone of truth because they've been repeating themselves for so long, and repetition disguises habit as certainty. Reason, understood in the Stoic way, is not a coldness that distances you from yourself, but an instrument of care that separates fact from judgment, emotion from command, possibility from catastrophizing. Marcus Aurelius practiced each morning a sober inspection of his thoughts to distinguish what was his from what was noise. He proposed examining ideas like goods in a port. Some are accepted, others are returned, none remain unchecked. When you do this, reason ceases to be a severe judge and becomes a gentle guardian. It does not crush your feelings, it illuminates them. Seneca, so attentive to the power of thought, warned that passions, if not governed, become tyrants. Reason does not exterminate emotion, it teaches it to sit down, it assigns it a place and a time, acknowledges the information it brings, and integrates it into the council without granting it the presidency. Thus, emotion contributes humanity, and reason contributes direction. Epictetus insisted that before each impression we should say, "You are only an impression, not the fact." By speaking to your thoughts this way, you deflate them, and in deflating them, you see more clearly. Using reason as a shield means training in that dialogue. When you hear the voice that decrees you can't, ask for evidence. When you hear the one that declares you're worthless, ask for criteria. When you hear the one that threatens, they will leave you. Ask for present facts. If there is no evidence, there is no verdict. If there is, don't dramatize. Design a small and reasonable plan. This method saves you from invented storms and prepares you for the real ones. For Stoic reason does not deny what is difficult. It designs form, rhythm, and resources to get through it. It is useful to create a notebook of judgments. In it you will note, without poetry, the thoughts most repeated when your mood drops. Next to each, you will write down evidence for and against, possible biases, more balanced alternatives. You will reread that inventory in calm moments, so that, in the storm, the muscle already knows what to do. Marcus Aurelius did something similar by reminding himself again and again that things are as they are, not as he wished, and that good consists in acting rightly in the face of what comes. That repetition turns reason into habit. Reason as a shield also applies to the body. The anxious mind declares emergencies where there are only challenges. The body, loyal, believes it. To interrupt that alliance, intervene with deliberate physical gestures. Long exhalations, relaxed shoulders, wide gaze. They are safety signals informing your system that there is no fire. With the fire contained, reason can speak without shouting, and in speaking, it will name what is happening. I feel fearful. I am not the fear. I feel sad. I am not the sadness. This grammar separates identity from state and reduces confusion. Seneca valued that clarity because it returns a man to the possession of himself. If you possess yourself, the winds of each mood do not sweep you away. Another use of the rational shield is informational hygiene. If you feed your mind only with disasters, comparisons, and noise, don't expect serenity. Choose with discernment what you consume. Nourish the mind as you nourish the body. Study ideas that expand, practice arts that order, converse with people who uplift. Reason flourishes in that garden. Epictetus proposed treating philosophy as medicine, not as ornament. Take it in frequent applied doses. Reading a sentence without practicing it is like looking at an instrument without playing it. It does not transform. Reason is tested in ordinary days, not only in speeches. You will find yourself, without warning, facing an unjust criticism, an unexpected delay, a temptation to procrastinate. There it will be seen if your shield is theory or custom. If it is custom, you will raise it naturally. If it is theory, you will look for it, and, not finding it in time, receive more blows than necessary. That is why you rehearse in calm times, to remember in times of crisis. A brief and powerful practice consists of asking questions that deactivate the theater of disaster. What is under my control right now? What is not? What can I do with what I do control? What would be the most dignified choice? Only 4 questions, but they order chaos. Marcus Aurelius would applaud you for your sobriety. The shield of reason also protects you from excessive self-accusation. A wounded mind turns every stumble into a crime and every delay into a sin. Reason distinguishes. There are errors, there are ignorances, there are limits. You repair what is repairable, learn what is learnable, accept what is inevitable. Seneca, who knew the harshness with oneself, proposed a gentle nightly examination. What did I do well? What did I do badly? What can I improve? Without a whip, without silly indulgence, with justice. That internal justice is rest. It is not indulgence, it is equanimity. You also use reason as a shield when you decide the language you use with yourself. Saying always, never, everything, nothing, paints with absolutism what is usually partial. Replace those absolutes with precise formulations. Sometimes today, on this occasion, the brain responds with less alarm to exact phrases than to shouts. Speaking well to yourself is not self-deception, it is precision, and precision is the mother of serenity. There is, however, a frequent misunderstanding, confusing reason with total control. Reason guides you, but does not promise mastery of life. Its promise is more humble and greater. It promises mastery of yourself. If you demand external guarantees, reason becomes servant of anxiety. If you direct it toward your conduct, it becomes teacher. Epictetus would agree, no one is free if he depends on what he does not control to be at peace. With the shield well held, you will be able to approach pain without letting it swallow you. You will be able to say, I am in pain, and at the same time, conduct yourself with dignity. You will be able to recognize, I am afraid, and at the same time, take the step that honors your values. You will be able to admit I was wrong, and at the same time, repair without destroying yourself. That simultaneity is one of the highest arts of the soul. Marcus Aurelius practiced it by writing that destiny provides the material and virtue fashions the work. Let your work be sober, steady, clean. And when the noise is too much, remember this minimal protocol. Breathe slowly, name what you feel, ask for evidence, act with measure. If the day overwhelms you, reduce your focus to the next gesture. If the mind invents accidents, return to the facts. If guilt digs in its claws, replace reproach with commitment. If pride shouts, return to the humility that thinks. This is how the shield is carried. This is how the silent battle that happens within you is won. And even if no one applauds, you will sleep with a calm forehead, because you will have obeyed your reason, not your wound. Try one day of application and, at nightfall, you will notice less noise and more direction, fewer thorns and more balance. 7th Stoic lesson. The present is enough. The past wounds when you carry it as if it were still happening, when every decision today consults an old memory for permission. That consultation seems like prudence, but it is a misplaced loyalty to an episode that has already ended. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that life is composed of successive instants, and only the present fully belongs to your governance. Yesterday is narrative and tomorrow project. If you accept this profound simplicity, you discover that much of your suffering arises from negotiating with ghosts. You negotiate with what someone told you years ago, with a guilt that has already served its sentence, with an image of yourself that no longer matches who you are now. The present does not ask you to erase anything. It asks you to use what you have learned without surrendering to the echo. When you place your attention on what belongs to today, the wound loses its strategic advantage because its power depends on projecting scenes that exist only on the screen of your mind. Epictetus taught to examine each impression the moment it appears. Not once it has already turned into a command, a look, a delay, an ambiguous phrase. All of it arrives as raw material, and your task is to give it shape without handing over the workshop. If you allow the past to draft the user manual, every new impression will submit to an old law. That is why the present is enough, because it is the only place where freedom can be exercised. Here you breathe, here you choose, here you utter the yes or the no that honors you. The wounded mind fears this focus because it loves the terrain of hypotheses. In hypotheses, no one contradicts you, and within them, you can win 1,000 imaginary battles. But life is decided in the concreteness of today, in the smallest gesture you make while hearing these words. Seneca warned that we get lost in anxiety over what could happen and waste the only time we truly possess. That anxiety fabricates alternate worlds where you are abandoned, criticized, failed, humiliated, expelled. You train for those worlds as if they were inevitable, and when the real day arrives, your body is exhausted from fighting shadows. Returning to the present is a kind of hygiene. You gather your attention as one gathers scattered coins and places them in a single purse. You ask yourself what is happening exactly now, what you need now, what you can do now. The rest you hand over to life with sober respect. It is not resignation, it is disciplined trust. The present is enough also because it reduces the size of the impossible. From afar, change looks like a mountain demanding feats. Up close, it can be crossed by modest steps. Marcus Aurelius practiced this in his own work, breaking down the great into manageable actions, sustaining them regularly, not dramatizing the hardness. When you do this, the wound finds fewer cracks through which to sneak. It likes to tell you that you will not manage, that you are lacking, that you arrived too late. In the present, those phrases lose their grandeur. If today you study for an hour, if today you set a short and clear boundary, if today you walk 10 minutes to care for your body, if today you write that difficult message, life begins to move. The murmur of powerlessness falls silent when the music of a concrete act begins. There is a necessary compassion here. The present is not always pleasant. Sometimes it arrives with losses, with uncertainties, with silences. To accept it is not to applaud misfortune, it is to recognize that fighting against what already is consumes the very energy you need to respond with dignity. Epictetus did not ask you to celebrate hardship, but to use it. If today hurts, the present offers you a practice, to hold yourself without cruelty, to ask for help without labeling yourself weak, to rest without guilt, to return tomorrow with a more refined decision. This way of staying awake does not eliminate the wound, it removes it from the throne. The past also has a healthy place in the present when you treat it as a library and not as a cell. Marcus Aurelius reviewed his memory to give thanks for good examples and to correct the tendencies that pulled him away from his center. Repeat that gesture. Take from yesterday names, lessons, warnings. Leave the rest as a trace that carries no weight. If someone looked at you with disdain, do not turn that look into your mirror. If someone loved you well, honor that love with acts that make you worthy of it. If you failed, repair what is repairable and do not turn guilt into a full-time occupation. The present is enough because it allows you to act without asking the archive for authorization. Perhaps you wonder how to sustain this practice when the mind is noisy. Return to the body. It always lives in today. Feel the soles of your feet on the ground, the air coming and going, the weight of your hands. Describe to yourself 3 things you see, 2 you hear, 1 you touch. It is no triviality, it is a rope to climb down from the tower of conjectures. From there, think with sobriety and choose a single action. Excessive planning is often fear in disguise. Operational simplicity protects your spirit. The present is enough, finally, because it contains the seed of a different future. Every tomorrow is born from a today that is honored. If you use this day to practice your dignity, your next days will hold more of that. If today pausing is difficult, pause for 5 seconds. If today speaking with clarity makes you tremble, tremble and speak. If today resting brings guilt, rest and notice that the world does not collapse. At night, write one line of real gratitude and another of concrete improvement. That sum builds a life. Seneca would call it exercise, Epictetus, discipline, Marcus, practice. You may call it care. Care for the instant you hold in your hands, the only one you will ever truly have. Care for it and you will see that quietly the wound begins to lose its script. Eighth Stoic lesson: dignity is not negotiable. There are decisions that may seem small and yet decide your destiny, because they decide who you are while you take them. Dignity is tested in details, in the tone with which you respond when pressured, in the boundary you set when asked to betray yourself, in the loyalty to your principles when no one is watching. The wound offers you discounts. Give in a little, and they will love you. Stay quiet a little, and they will accept you. Endure a little, and they will leave you alone. Those discounts seem irrelevant until, after months or years, you review your account and realize you have sold yourself off in installments. Stoicism calls you to a different economy. Anything charged at the cost of your dignity is far too expensive. Epictetus was blunt about this. No one can make you inferior without your consent, and that consent is signed with actions. You sign it when you laugh at what hurts you just to belong, when you remain where you are humiliated out of fear of loneliness, when you work against your values out of fear of losing a benefit. It is not a moralistic condemnation. It is a reminder of power. You can rescind that contract the very moment you remember your worth. Seneca wrote that the noble person is recognized in how they endure and how they choose. Enduring does not mean putting up with indignity. It means standing in what is dignified even when it has a cost. Sometimes the cost will be temporary discomfort, sometimes the loss of an opportunity that was never real, sometimes the solitude that clarifies. The price for not paying it is higher, losing yourself. Marcus Aurelius practiced a simple criterion for deciding, is this consistent with my rational and social nature? Does it do good for the whole without betraying me? Can I look at it without shame if a God were to see into my heart? Bring that witness to your table. If to keep a seat you must change your face, that seat is not yours. If to maintain a bond you must make yourself smaller, that bond is not a place, it is a tunnel. Dignity is not imposed with shouting, it is sustained in firm silences. A no said with respect is worth more than 1,000 yes spoken in fear. The wound insists on confusing dignity with pride. Destructive pride seeks to feel greater. Serene dignity seeks simply not to be less than you are. The difference shows in the internal climate it leaves behind. Pride leaves haughty loneliness. Dignity leaves worked peace. Defending your dignity is not about taking revenge on the world. It is about caring for yourself so that you can offer the world the best of what you have without charging it an emotional price. When you say no to abuse, you say yes to your capacity to love without resentment. When you say yes to a coherent commitment, you say no to the dispersion that robs you of presence. That intimate arithmetic keeps the house in order. Dignity is not negotiable, but the way you express it can be. Marcus Aurelius recommended gentleness in manner and firmness in purpose. You can say no without humiliating. You can hold a boundary without theatrics. You can withdraw without staging a public trial. The wound loves spectacle because spectacle drains you and leaves you doubting. Dignity prefers sobriety because sobriety preserves all your energy for the life that truly belongs to you. Learn to draft limits that are brief and clear, to sustain them with actions, and to let them speak for you when another tries to argue with your words instead of your conduct. Seneca warned against the habit of seeking approval as if it were oxygen. It is understandable that the wound does so. At some point in your story, approval was scarce food, but the adult you are can choose another nourishment. If you treat yourself with respect, your nervous system stops begging for crumbs. It is a moral physiology. The body relaxes when it understands that you will not place it in degrading situations. From that calm is born a silent authority that others perceive, even if they cannot name it. It is not intimidation, it is clarity. Sometimes the challenge appears in subtle ways. A dismissive comment, an invasive demand, a promise endlessly postponed. The wound invites you to over-explain or to look the other way. Dignity proposes a concrete gesture. Name what is happening without judgment and ask for what is right. If no agreement comes, withdraw your presence. It is not a threat, it is hygiene. Epictetus would smile with sober irony. If you go to a banquet and are not served, do not kick the table or steal another's plate. Stand up and look for another table. That exit, so often avoided out of fear, frees an immense amount of energy for your work. You must also watch the inner square, where you negotiate with yourself. Sometimes you disrespect yourself in private and then demand respect in public. You promise to wake early and betray yourself. You promise honesty and deceive yourself. You promise rest and push yourself into irritability. Dignity begins in that intimacy. Keeping your word to yourself is the most powerful way to recognize yourself. Marcus Aurelius practiced it as naturally as breathing. Today I will do what I must, with what I have, where I am. If he failed, he corrected without insulting himself. That protocol protects you from both perfectionism and negligence. Dignity does not demand flawlessness, it demands growing coherence. Perhaps you fear that holding your dignity will leave you alone. Sometimes it will, but that solitude is not emptiness, it is available space. Into it come cleaner relationships, fairer work, silences that bring rest instead of blame. Without that space, the new cannot find its place. If fear insists, remember this simple rule. Do not sacrifice who you are for what you could obtain. What is gained by betraying yourself charges interests you cannot pay. What is gained by honoring yourself bears its own weight. Dignity is not negotiable, and by refusing to negotiate it, you become capable of negotiating almost everything else without losing yourself. You can give time, adjust expectations, change plans, learn from others, make mistakes, and repair them. None of that strips you of your name. You strip yourself of it when you accept indignity as the price of belonging. Epictetus would embrace you for standing firm without violence. Seneca would celebrate the sobriety of your limits. Marcus would nod at the sight of your peace. That peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the certainty that you have not sold yourself. Ninth Stoic lesson: freedom is trained. Many like to think of freedom as a lightning bolt, an epic gesture that breaks chains once and for all. Stoicism conceives it as a muscle. It grows fatigued if you don't use it. It strengthens if you exercise it. It gets injured if you demand from it without preparation. The wound promises you shortcuts. Tomorrow you will be different. With one heroic decision, you will erase years of habits. With one inspiration, you will heal without practice. That promise keeps you still, because the heroism that never comes serves as an excuse not to begin. Epictetus proposed another path: to choose each day small actions governed by your reason. That accumulation, sometimes invisible, builds the inner authority we call freedom. Marcus Aurelius trained his freedom in ordinary tasks. He did not look for grand stages to prove himself. He tested himself in rising when it was time, in speaking when appropriate, in staying silent when it was prudent, in persevering when his mind sought distraction. If that seems little, review your own experience. It is harder to maintain a humble habit than to sustain a grand outburst. Yet the habit changes life, while the outburst changes only the day. Freedom is trained when you decide not to immediately obey your dominant impulse. If laziness tends to dominate, you rise 10 minutes earlier. If rumination tends to dominate, you write 3 lines and go for a walk. If people-pleasing tends to dominate, you say one brief phrase that represents you. If haste tends to dominate, you pause for 3 breaths. It is not about torturing yourself. It is about educating yourself. Seneca insisted that time, well spent, is immense wealth. One way to spend it well is to turn your day into a moral gymnasium. Select exercises for the muscles that fail you most. If you procrastinate, practice starting. If you grow disorganized, practice finishing. If you ignite easily, practice cooling down. If you scatter, practice focusing on a single thing for a short block. The key is not intensity, it is sober repetition. Freedom does not spring from a speech. It springs from proving to yourself day after day that you can obey yourself when you give yourself a worthy instruction. That fulfillment builds a bridge of trust between your word and your hands. Without that bridge, every goal turns into a swamp. The wound interrupts this training with two tricks. The first is perfectionism. If you don't do it perfectly, don't do it at all. The second is fatalism. If you already failed, it is pointless to continue. For both, the antidote is active humility. You do it imperfectly, and you continue. You fail today, and you resume tomorrow. Continuity belongs to you, perfection does not. Epictetus would say that your prohairesis, your faculty of choice, gets oiled with practice. The more often you choose well in small matters, the more likely you will choose well when something big puts you to the test. Training freedom also requires training your environment. You are not a rock without context. If everything around you invites dispersion, you will need heroic energy to concentrate. If your environment aligns with your purpose, the effort is shared. Order your desk, order your schedule, order your relationships, not from obsessive control, but from intelligent support. Marcus Aurelius sought brief refuges of silence amid the noise of empire. You can build rituals where mind and body know what comes next. Repetition creates neural tracks along which the carriage passes with less jolting. Freedom is also trained by correcting internal language. When you say, "I always give up, I never finish," "Everyone fails me, nothing changes," you tied yourself with words. Replace them with formulations that allow training. Sometimes I give up, and today I will hold on 5 minutes more. Sometimes I struggle to finish, and today I will close one single task. Some failed me, and today I choose with better judgment. Something changes when I practice, and today I practice. Seneca would not deny the reality of your tendencies. He would invite you to narrate them in a way that leaves you room to maneuver. An essential component of this training is how you treat yourself when it doesn't work out. If you insult yourself, you rob yourself of the spirit to try again. If you excuse yourself with empty stories, you rob yourself of rigor. The middle ground is kind discipline. You say to yourself, "I failed here. I will repair it this way. I resume now." No whip, no endless nap. Marcus Aurelius wrote his self-corrections as work notes, not as sentences. From that tone arises possible continuity. Trained freedom becomes visible in decisions that once seemed impossible. Before, you said yes out of fear, and now you say no with respect. Before, you stayed silent out of convenience, and now you speak calmly. Before, you hid in complaints, and now you turn an hour into work, not because the world has softened, but because you have become firmer. The wound does not stop speaking, but it stops commanding. You learn to thank its warning without obeying its threat. You learn to hear the tremor without mistaking it for an order. You learn to hold to your center without needing noise. Epictetus would sum up this process with his serious humor. "Do not tell me what you have learned, show me what you do." Training freedom is making visible what you believe through repeated actions. If you believe in dignity, it will show in your boundaries. If you believe in temperance, it will show in your way of consuming. If you believe in justice, it will show in how you treat those who return nothing to you. And if one day it does not show, do not unleash a storm, adjust the plan and practice again. Greatness, Seneca said, does not appear suddenly, nor does freedom. It is a patient craft. I want to leave you with a final image for this lesson. You are in a workshop in morning light. On the table, everyday tools, a notebook where you jot down your actions, a clock that marks short blocks, a cup of water, a door that opens for a 10-minute walk, a phone that sometimes rests face down, a mirror where you tell yourself the truth without violence. There is no epic music playing, only a silence in which your breath can be heard. Each day you enter, work a little, and leave with 1 more millimeter of progress. Weeks pass and someone asks you what changed. You calmly answer that you now trust yourself a little more because you keep your word to yourself a little more. That little repeated is freedom, and that freedom, trained, is the ethical ground from which to love, to create, to decide, and to persevere. 10th Stoic lesson: turn your wound into a teacher. Your wound can be executioner or teacher, border or bridge, echo that diminishes you, or voice that instructs you. The difference is not in the scar, but in the use you make of what happened to you. When the soul only asks why me, the story becomes a circle. When it asks for what in me, the path appears. And here Seneca is clear. Adversity shapes the character of the spirit. His warning is not a hymn to pain for pain's sake, but a guide so that the blow does not own you. If the wound dictates your decisions, you repeat old scenes with new actors. If you turn it into a teacher, it brings you lessons that leave you truer, soberer, freer. The first lesson is one of precision. Learning from the wound is not romanticizing it. It is studying it with rigor as one analyzes a phenomenon so as not to repeat it. What signals precede it when it tries to take command? What words does your mind use to lock you in? What habits feed it and which ones weaken it? This examination makes you realistic and compassionate. Realistic because you describe facts and not legends. Compassionate because you recognize that you survived as best you could and that now you can live better. Turning it into a teacher requires a workbook. You will note what triggers you, what calms you, what ignites your dignity, and what robs it from you. Marcus Aurelius proposed looking at everything from the inside, seeing what it is made of. If you look at your reaction from the inside, you distinguish fear from prudence, vanity from joy, dignity from pride. With that clarity, the wound ceases to be a shapeless monster and becomes material for cultivation. The second lesson is one of direction. A wound that teaches does not push you toward revenge. It directs you toward the good. Whoever learned from humiliation cultivates respect. Whoever learned from abandonment cultivates presence. Whoever learned from betrayal cultivates truth, not because he swears never to suffer again, but because he discovered he is capable of remaining noble even in the open storm. As Seneca insists, greatness does not depend on applause, it depends on the constant choice of good. The third is one of boundaries. For the wound to teach, you must give it a place in the council, not the throne. You listen to its memory to prevent blindness, but you do not allow it to write your decrees. If it whispers distrust everyone, your reason responds trust with discernment. If it declares they always leave you, your experience shows who stayed. If it demands blow for blow, your dignity remembers that your peace is not in winning the scene, but in not losing yourself. Epictetus would applaud that inner government. You do not repress the wound until it suffocates, you educate it until it integrates. The fourth is one of language. Before it spoke in absolutes, always, never, everything, nothing. Now it learns nuances, sometimes today, not yet, already enough. That vocabulary reduces catastrophe and opens possibility. The teaching wound trains you to review without cruelty, to learn without self-hatred, to advance without shouting. And remember something precious. Compassion with yourself does not weaken you, it makes you responsible. Whoever takes good care of himself demands better of himself. The fifth is one of relationship. Your wound educates your view of others. You stop demanding purity and begin to value humble coherence. You distinguish the one who wounds out of malice from the one who wounds out of ignorance, the one who asks forgiveness to begin again from the one who asks forgiveness to continue the same. Marcus Aurelius suggested remembering that if another sins, he does so out of ignorance of the good. That memory does not excuse, but rescues you from sterile resentment. A teaching wound teaches you sober justice. You forgive without denying what happened. You set limits without theatricality. You withdraw without hatred when dignity requires it. The sixth is one of craft. Transforming the wound into a teacher turns your life into a workshop. You observe, correct, rehearse, start again. Epictetus would call this exercise, the more you repeat, the more natural virtue becomes. You do not wait for inspiration, you practice. Where once there was story, now there is work. Where once you asked for guarantees, now you build credibility with yourself by means of brief and constant acts. The seventh is one of sober hope. You do not believe everything will turn out well by decree. You trust that you will be able to respond well no matter what happens. That difference returns to you a power the wound had taken. When you trust your response, you stop begging for certainty and begin to walk. If you fall, you do not build a tribunal, you build a plan. If you succeed, you do not get drunk, you continue. Thus the wound ceases to be a threat and becomes a teacher of constancy. The eighth is one of mature gratitude. You do not thank the blow, you thank what you learned in rebuilding yourself. You thank the clarity you conquered, the friendships that remained, the habits born from the boundary. Marcus would say, few things are needed for a happy life. One of them is knowing how to recognize the good present. Looking with gratitude orders your spirit and dissolves the bitterness that impoverishes so much. The ninth is one of legacy. Your wound, educated, turns you toward service. You share what you learned without pontificating. You accompany without invading. You offer tools without imposing. Whoever makes his wound a teacher becomes a good neighbor to the world. He does not need trophies. He needs to contribute. And that contribution, however small, sustains your own discipline, because when you help, you remind yourself who you decide to be. How is this lesson lived on an ordinary day? You wake and say to yourself, today I work with my wound, not under its yoke. You breathe, review your principles, choose a gesture that embodies your dignity. If the old voice proposes silence, you tell the truth with respect. If it proposes fleeing, you remain 1 minute longer. If it proposes pleasing to avoid loss, you choose to honor yourself even if you tremble. You write down the result without adjectives. You learn, you continue. At night, you practice Seneca's serene review. What did I do well? What did I do poorly? What can I improve? You praise yourself for the straight, correct what is twisted, release what is inevitable, and you sleep with a forehead a little calmer. If ever nostalgia assaults you for the old kingdom of complaint, remember how poor it was. Long speeches and little action, immense promises and minimal continuity. Today you sign another contract, less noise and more substance. If confusion returns, you return to the beginning and repeat in order what you learned, until the muscle remembers. Turn your wound into a teacher, not to revere pain, but to revere the life that, in spite of everything, keeps burning with desire for good. Whatever your story, you are still on time. Do not look for a perfect ending. Look for a life in motion. If tomorrow you stumble, rise without theater and adjust your step. If today you succeed, celebrate without vanity and offer the good you can. Marcus will remind you of sobriety, Epictetus of discipline, Seneca of humanity. With such company, the wound no longer commands you, it guides you, and you, having learned to listen without obeying, will walk with a new kind of peace, the kind that needs no noise to exist. Move forward with patience and without noise. You have walked through an intimate territory, and each step has been a frank conversation with your own conscience. You looked at the wound without disguises. You distinguished what depends on you. You refused to make pacts with fear. You tamed haste with pause. You recovered your true name. You raised the shield of reason. Now, gathering everything, the silent outline of a freer life appears. Not perfect, not unscathed, but owner of itself. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Each person's life is what their thoughts make of it." After this journey, your thoughts have gained quality and direction. When quality grows, decisions fall into order. When direction appears, time ceases to scatter. There is a new serenity in you, not because the world has changed, but because you chose to change your way of being in it. Let us remain a moment longer in this threshold to understand what it means to close without fleeing and to open without anxiety. The silent wound with which we began has not disappeared as if by magic. It would be naive to demand from the past what it cannot return, but it has changed its place. It no longer governs from the shadows, it participates from the council. It no longer dictates your reactions, it gently reminds you which areas need light. When you breathe, you notice the difference. Before, air was scarce, now there is space. Before, the mind stumbled over fatal conclusions. Now it asks, contrasts, chooses. That is the Stoic revolution, small on the outside, deep on the inside. From today, every daily decision can be an act of inner government. Upon rising, you will order your day around what depends on you and place in its sight what does not. You will speak with the truth that is possible, not with strident truth. You will listen without swallowing every interpretation. You will review your judgments calmly, and when you err, you will correct without insulting yourself. If praise comes, it will allow joy without intoxication. If criticism comes, you will seek the useful meaning without yielding your center. If the temptation arrives to repeat old pacts, you will remember that your dignity is not negotiable. It is not about becoming invulnerable, but about becoming reliable to yourself. That reliability sustains the promises you make to yourself and turns your future into a habitable territory. Perhaps you fear relapsing into familiar paths. It will happen. But now you know the way back. You will breathe, separate facts from judgments, ask yourself the simple and decisive questions, put a brief gesture at the service of your principles, and you will continue. Stoicism does not ask for perfection, it asks for continuity. A new habit is not born of a heroic moment, but of many discreet afternoons in which you choose well. If you support yourself with rituals, even better. Write down at dawn the intention that will govern your day. Write down at dusk one line of real gratitude and another of concrete improvement. Repeat the phrases that anchor you, without superstition and with discipline. I can choose, I can pause, I can act with dignity. They will be violin strings tuned just enough to produce music, not clotheslines where you hang guilt. Carry these voices with you as tools, not as empty amulets. Use them. Before saying goodbye, I want to invite you to a small commitment that can change the course of the coming months. Subscribe to this space of Stoic practice and join us week by week. Not because collecting content will save you, but because the constancy of listening to yourself and exercising, guided by a voice that respects you, makes the work of polishing character easier. Each episode will be a reminder to return to the center, a short training for your mind, a sincere conversation that encourages you to live with temperance and courage. If it serves you, share this journey with someone who needs a compass. Multiplying good also strengthens your own. Before closing, let us do one last exercise together. As you breathe, run your mind through your day and name a gesture of dignity you will make in the coming hours. Take a simple and vivid image of yourself fulfilling it. Let your body memorize that scene. Thus, character is forged in honest images repeated with care and rigor. Return now to the present. Open yourself to the idea that there is enough in you to face whatever comes, because you will not go alone. You will go in the company of your reason, your pause, your courage, your inner city. If the world burns around you, remember that keeping the center is a form of help. If someone seeks you for sterile conflict, offer clarity and boundary. If fatigue asks you for truce, rest without guilt. If pride asks for clamor, return to the sobriety that thinks. That sobriety, far from dimming you, gives you your own brightness. Throughout this episode, we have carved images you can carry with you. The rock that withstands the waves without becoming a wave. The window opened after years of darkness. The two bowls that order your effort. The narrow bridge you cross by watching your steps. Do not collect them in mental shelves. Use them. When the mind begins to fabricate catastrophes, choose one and breathe within it. When guilt disguises itself as ethics, remember that true ethics repairs with justice and moves on. When ambition disguises itself as virtue, check if you are not asking for applause outside for what you have not yet practiced inside. If your story hurts, embrace it without idolizing it. If your story makes you proud, thank it without deifying yourself. The center is not a neutral and cold place. It is a small fire sustained with care. Feeding it is your task, and that task is done today. If what you heard touched something in you, subscribe right now. Allow the regularity of the encounter to remind you of what you already know and to propel you toward what you still avoid. Turn on notifications so that life does not distract you from your life. When each session arrives, gift yourself 20 minutes of presence without competing screens. Write one line, practice one gesture, converse with someone you trust. Thus, philosophy ceases to be a Sunday visitor and becomes resident. I want to say goodbye without grandiloquence, with sober gratitude. Thank you for your attention, for your intimate courage, for your desire for good. Thank you for showing yourself that you can look at yourself without fleeing. If at times progress seems slow, remember that even the oldest mountain was the work of small insistences. In one of his notes, Marcus Aurelius told himself he must be content with advancing as much as possible. Let us be content with that, and at the same time, sustain the ambition of virtue. May the next dawn find you with a clear intention and a ready gesture. May difficult conversations find you with pause. May losses find you with dignity. May joy find you without fear. And may, when you look in the mirror, you recognize in your eyes a peace that has been worked for, not gifted. We will meet in the next episode. Bring with you your questions, your attempts, your stumbles, and your discreet victories. I will bring better formulated questions, more refined exercises, and the same quiet faith in your capacity to choose. Subscribe now and walk with us this path of lucidity, temperance, and courage. May Marcus Aurelius accompany you with his sobriety, Seneca with his clarity, Epictetus with his discipline. Your voice is essential here. Every reflection strengthens and elevates our community, reflecting the true value of each individual and contributing to our shared Stoic identity. The reflection that receives the most support will be set as the standard of this community of Stoic minds. A community that does not flee from pain but walks through it with courage, with wisdom, with honor. We will see each other in our next gathering at Stoicism for Winners, where we will continue exploring the riches of Stoic wisdom applied to modern life. Now, take the opportunity to deepen your Stoic practice with new recommended podcast sessions. Follow us so you don't miss any reflection that could help you at just the moment when everything feels overwhelming. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we publish episodes designed to accompany you when life feels heavy, when it's hard to stay calm, when you need a word to remind you who you are. Not following us is to risk missing exactly that lesson that could bring back the peace you have been seeking. Until we meet again, remember, you are the sole owner of your perception, the creator of your peace, and the warrior of your own battle. This is the legacy of Stoicism, the art of being invincible.